Hi everyone, a big welcome back to my channel. So I had a really good reading month again in January. My 2021 reading is going strong, people. I read another 8 books. Goodreads says my yearly goal is 50 books, but we all know I'm secretly legging it towards 100. All but the final 2 books I'm going to be talking about today are brand new books, so a big thank you to the publishers who sent me proof copies. It will never stop being exciting. We have a couple of really good ones in here as well, so let's just get into it. First up, in February, I read Fleet by Judith Wilson. This is a new contemporary poetry collection. It came out at the end of last month by the amazing indie publisher Carcanet. It explores the life of a real woman who lived in mid-1800s England, her husband who was a seller of exotic birds, and her 2 children who she ends up being convicted of abandoning. The collection explores elusive histories and lost voices from the past, imperial power, migration and displacement, and the trading of commodities, most centrally of these exotic birds. So this collection encapsulates so much. It is about so much, but at the same time, this whole thing feels so seamless and manages to come together as one so superbly. We have a real feeling of history in this collection, grounded in real people and places and documents, but this transgresses into this feeling of universality, of secrets and omissions and silences that stretch far beyond their time. There's a real fluidity, a real haunting, a real fairy tale-like feeling to this collection that is so perfect. And the imagery of the exotic birds throughout this collection and what they represent in terms of imperial power and migration and flight is so stunning, both on a surface level of how these birds are described, the beautiful vivid imagery and the flow of the images that are created, but also in what they enable these poems to say. Honestly, I don't think I am a prolific enough poetry reader to do the review of this collection justice yet. I will be one day. I am getting better. But suffice to say, I just thought this collection was beautiful on every level. It was dazzling and affecting and haunting. I just loved it. So in the end, I gave Fleet 5 out of 5 stars. Next up, in February, I read Empty Houses by Brenda Navarro. This is another indie pick, this one from Daunt Books Publishing, and it also came out at the end of last month. And this one is a translated work of fiction being translated from Spanish by Sophie Hughes. So this book is set in Mexico, and it most centrally explores the theme of motherhood. It follows the stories of 2 different women, one whose 3-year-old son has recently disappeared and another who lives on the other side of the city who is protecting her recently stolen child. So everything about this book was exciting to me. It immediately gave me Leela Slimani vibes, dark, psychological, translated literary fiction. Love it. And this book really did deliver on all of those aspects. I thought it was really good. More than anything, I was just so absorbed while I read this. I love the structuring, the alternating chapters between these 2 women, fascinating. I loved the central theme of motherhood and what that means to different people and the pressures that come along with it and what it can lead people to. I also really love the setting. I haven't read many books set in Mexico, I don't believe, but I really want to read more now. And just everything seemed to work in this novel. The overall tone and the dryness of the language, it's all just had me turning the pages. So overall, I'd say this was a really good read. I didn't think it was perfect. I don't think it made the biggest impression on me. For example, I didn't particularly connect to the two main characters too much, and that is something that is a big deal to me while I'm reading. But the whole reading experience was just so fun. I would highly recommend it to anyone who is interested in this kind of thing, or anyone who's just wanting to read more translated fiction. So in the end, I gave Empty Houses 4 stars. Next up, I read Plain Bad Heroines by Emily M. Danforth, and I actually listened to this one on audiobook. The book is set over 2 timelines, one in the year 1902 in a girls' boarding school when girls start dying from strange wasp attacks and the school has to close. The other timeline is set 100 years later when the school opens back up for a group of young actresses to go into the school and make a film about the curse. So this book was a very strange one for me. Right from the start, I was hooked by this book. I was obsessed with it. I devoured the first half. I was loving it. Boarding school, swarming insects, sapphic relationships, rotting fruit. I loved the alternating timelines. They had me very intrigued. And just generally, when this book was good, it was very good. Deliciously crafted, glittering prose, really enticing characters and settings. I really thought we were onto a winner here. But unfortunately, this book just really fell flat for me towards the end, like dramatically, shockingly so. The ending here did not deliver. The ultimate concept here and the reveal and the way that the two storylines came together was just so upsettingly weak. I also didn't really buy some of the friendships that had apparently formed by the end. Everything just ended up feeling really rushed and not well thought through at all. So this is a really weird one for me. It almost feels as though I read 2 different books. The first half was so strong and delicious and clever. I almost feel as though I'm betraying it by not giving this book like 4.5 stars, but I just can't. I do not know what happened at the end of this book, but the quality and the reading experience just fell off a cliff. Has anybody else read this? Did anyone else feel the same way as me? Please let me know that I am not alone. And so in the end, I kind of went in the middle and gave this one 3 stars. Next up in February, I picked up Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. Guys, this book. So I'm sure most of you already know what this one is about. It's been fucking everywhere recently. One of the most anticipated releases of the year for sure. But for those of you who don't know what it's about, this book is set in some undetermined time in the future, and it follows the story of an exceptional artificial friend named Clara, who is finally bought from her store and is taken home with Josie, a teenage girl, and her mother. So I did not expect to get a proof copy of this book. I was so over the moon when I got an email from Faber, and like everyone else, I was super excited about this book. I've only read one other Kazuo Ishiguro before. I read Never Let Me Go a few years ago, But I've seen him talk various places. I actually saw him talk in person at the Man Booker 50 Festival in London a few years ago. He's just a very clever man and a very good writer, and this book did not disappoint. Now, this book is very me. I do have a philosophy degree. I have studied personhood and AIs and what constitutes a person. I love that shit. In the past, when I have read philosophy in my fiction, I have ended up feeling somewhat unfulfilled and kind of frustrated, like the author has barely scratched the surface for me. See my thoughts on Sophie Ward's Love and Other Thought Experiments if you're interested. And while that did kind of happen with this book, like obviously there were times in here when we could have dived further into the philosophy and I was kind of feeling like, you know the philosophy here, Ishiguro. I know you do. Give it to me. Nevertheless, I did think that this book, for what it is and what it's doing, was basically perfect. I love Ishiguro's prose, its simplicity and beauty, and the way it conveys so much without saying much. I loved that this really focused on Clara's perspective and experiences. The way that this subtly changed the way things were presented and the way we saw things was very clever. I loved learning about Josie and her relationship with Clara and her relationship with her mother and her childhood best friend. I loved the mystery surrounding the world and the ways in which it was different and the same to the world we know now. That is something that Ishiguro does so well. And just generally all the shades of grey in here, the uncertainty and the haziness and the lack of clarity, so good. So this was a very special little book. I thought it was very clever. Ideal to just read in 1 or 2 sittings and to just think about. It isn't a favourite of mine. I don't think I was particularly emotionally attached to it, but I do think it was pretty brilliant and I can't give it anything other than 5 stars. The sky outside is going mad. I can only apologise for what this is doing to the lighting. Next up in February, I read Passerine by Kirsten Luckins. I'm hoping that is how you pronounce this title. This is another new indie contemporary poetry book that came out recently, and the collection is comprised entirely of epistolary poems from the author to her dead friend. It explores themes of grieving and healing and remembering and is filled with beautiful natural imagery. So I love the idea behind this collection. I love that the poems are letters from the poet to her friend. I think that is such a great idea. I've never read a collection like that before and it was very beautiful. It gave the collection a really intimate and raw feel. And I really was convinced by the majority of the poems in here. I did feel as though they were real letters from a woman to her friend, filled with real emotion, and that was pretty special. The imagery in here is also a highlight. I love nature imagery in poetry, and I especially love nature imagery in poetry that isn't just like all of the nature imagery in poetry that we have read a million times before. And this collection did succeed in feeling quite unique in this way. I loved the bird imagery throughout. It had this real feeling of movement and of life, but there is also this persistent lurking feeling throughout the collection that death is never too far away, and it captured that really well. There were understandably poems in here that I didn't personally connect to as much as others. There were also some that I wasn't as impressed with as others. I think perhaps this collection could have just been a little shorter and the poems could have just been cherry-picked a little more. But overall, I really did enjoy this. I thought it worked really quite well, and it certainly had an effect on me while I read, which is basically all you can hope for from poetry. So in the end, I gave this one 3.5 stars. Next up in February, I read The Divines by Ellie Eaton, another new girls' boarding school book. It's a bit of a thing at the moment. This one is also set over two timelines, one in present day LA and the other in the 1990s at a girls' boarding school. It is essentially about female friendship and scandal and memory. So this book had a lot of good ingredients and it was pretty enjoyable to read. I liked the two timelines, I liked the secrecy and the mystery, and I was pretty hooked to find out what would happen throughout. The book did touch on interesting themes. I love books that explore female identity and sexuality and friendship. I liked that this book touched on the class divide. Not particularly amazingly, but it was there. And I also really enjoyed the exploration of memory in here. That is something that absolutely fascinates me in novels. That all being said, I don't think that anything in this book was done particularly well. I don't think it was anything special. And the main character, honestly, was kind of a letdown. She wasn't particularly likable or interesting. She didn't really make too much of an impression. So a fine book, I would say. Not amazing, not terrible. Honestly, I suspect that I will forget all about it in a couple of months' time. So in the end, I gave this one 2.5 stars. The penultimate book I read in February was The X-Talk by Rachel Lynn Solomon. This is a relatively new contemporary romance novel that is essentially rivals to lovers. It follows a woman named Shay who has worked in public radio for going on a decade when she starts to clash with the new recruit Dominic. And the two end up working on a live radio show together that gives out relationship advice. So those of you who have been watching my channel for a little while will probably know that romance novels are not really my thing. I've probably only read like 3 ever, and none that were as straight up romance as this. But recently I've been in the mood to try out more romance novels. I feel like they're kind of having a moment right now on BookTube. People seem to be reading a lot of them and loving them. This is one in particular that I had heard nothing but great things about, so I thought, why not? Let's give this one a go. Unfortunately, I don't think that I loved this novel quite as much as everyone else seems to, although it was enjoyable. I actually listened to this one on audiobook and I feel like that was a good way to consume this. It felt very easy, it didn't require too much attention, and I really liked how contemporary this book felt. It felt very realistic regarding things like dating apps and social media and podcast use. But while I read this, I guess I just realised that I don't really like reading about the beginnings of relationships exclusively. I love reading about romantic relationships in novels. They are one of my favourite things to read about, but I tend to like reading about relationships tropes that are already established, that are working through things, marriages, relationships over a long period of time. People who have a history, basically, and already know one another. Whereas this book was more just about attraction and angst and will they, won't they, and miscommunication. As such, I did kind of find this book frustrating at times and kind of unfulfilling. I do have to say that it was quite an enjoyable change of pace. I really did like the sexual tension in here, and I did really quite like the ending. There were some moments that felt pretty kick-ass and satisfying. So something new for me, enjoyable in aspects, definitely pleased that I tried it out, but not something I massively loved, so I gave this one 3 stars. And the final book that I read in February was A Year of Marvelous Ways by Sarah Winman. This is a historical novel set primarily in 1947 in Cornwall. It follows the story of an eccentric 90-year-old woman named Marvelous Ways and a young soldier named Francis Drake, who is still reeling from the war when the 2 characters meet and form an unexpected friendship. So many of you will know that Sarah Winman is one of my favourite authors of all time. Her novel Tin Man is one of my favourite books ever. It is perfection. I have also read her earlier novel When God Was a Rabbit, and so this one was the only one that I had yet to read. My husband Cameron has been away these past 8 weeks training for his new job as a firefighter, and he sweetly suggested that the 2 of us buddy read this one together while he is away. So that's what we've been doing. We've been reading so many chapters in the week and then discussing them together on the weekend. Now, the premise of this book isn't actually something that either of us are particularly interested in. Neither of us really like wartime novels. We tend to avoid them, but both of us were just here for Sarah Winman and her glorious prose, and I think we both pretty much reacted to this novel in the way that we thought we would. This novel is nowhere near as good as Tin Man. Tin Man is on another level, and like I say, a lot about the setup of this novel wasn't really my favourite, but Sarah Winman is just a lovely writer. Her prose is so elegant and whimsical and perceptive. She is the queen of stunning one-liners. In terms of the plot of this one, I did enjoy that it was primarily focused on character. I liked learning about the 2 central characters individually, as well as their relationship that forms together, and seeing what this relationship taught them about themselves and each other. In places, this novel was definitely very touching and emotional and just heartwarming. There were some technical things that I would have changed about this novel. I think the structuring could have benefited from being reworked slightly, allowing us to learn about these characters in a more authentic way and in a less info-dumpy way, especially at the beginning. There were also some sections that just felt a little bit disjointed. You could definitely tell which sections were the stronger ones. I'm not going to go into all of that because I'm verging on becoming my editor self right now rather than my booktube self. So overall, not my favourite book, but I love Sarah Winman. I love love what she's doing now, and it's always a pleasure to be back in her prose. So in the end, I gave this one 3 stars. So there we have all of the books that I read in February. I feel like this video has gone on for fucking ever, so I apologize about that. I hope you guys all enjoyed watching nevertheless. Thank you so much if you made it to the end. As always, let me know if you've read any of these books down below in the comments. Let me know what you've been reading recently. I look forward to chatting to you all soon, and I'll see you soon in my next one. Bye.